Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. He's the king of breakfast TV and he's back.
Eamon Holmes back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh yes, already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon.
Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Happy Valentine's Day. Today we're finding out if there's a political angle to office romances. Also, a new levy that's scheduled to be slapped on our energy bills, but a parliamentary rebellion brewing over it. We'll be discussing all of that and the latest strikes after the headlines.
Good morning. It's 9:31. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. The US military says it has recovered key sensors from the suspected Chinese spy balloon. The balloon was downed off South Carolina's coast on the 4th of February. The US Northern Command says the search crews found significant debris from the site, including the priority sensor and electronic pieces. The US has also shot down 3 more objects since then. Beijing denies it was a government spy vessel. Millions of households are facing an increase in their council tax from April. Research by the County Councils Network says 3/4 of councils in England are planning a 5% hike. This is the maximum amount allowed without the need for local referendum and would add around £100 a year to bills for average Band D properties. The local authorities say they have little choice but to raise the council tax in order to protect services. The UK's unemployment rate has remained unchanged despite the economy flatlining. New figures from the Office for National Statistics say unemployment was 3.7% in the 3 months to December. Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has described figures as a sign of resilience, adding that the best thing to do to make people's wages go further is to halve inflation. But Labour says the government has left the economy lagging behind on the global stage. Syria's president has told UN officials he will open 2 more border crossings so emergency aid can enter from neighbour Turkey. The move comes a week after an earthquake struck Turkey and Syria, killing more than 37,000 people. President Bashar al-Assad has agreed to allow United Nations aid deliveries for 3 months. Car giant Ford has said it is cutting around 3,800 jobs across Europe over the next 3 years. This includes 1,300 jobs in the UK, with most of the cuts at the research site at Dunton in Essex. Production sites at Harwood, Dagenham and Daventry will not be affected. It is part of a major restructuring programme, with the brand saying it wants to focus on a smaller range of electric vehicles. TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:35 and this is the briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, strikes continue to sweep through industrial and service sectors right across the United Kingdom. Whether it's unreformed Marxist Mick Lynch and the militant ASLEF Union, or indeed staff at the British Museum. That's right, members of the Public and Commercial Services Union who work at the British Museum are set to strike until the 19th of February. Half-term events have had to be cancelled, and parents hoping for a cultural or educational afternoon out will have to think again. But what exactly is this strike over, and what does it say more widely about the industrial landscape of the United Kingdom? Olivia Utley is our political reporter and joins me live from the picket line. Olivia, what are these strikes about?
Well, it's a very broad-ranging strike, really. What the strikers here are asking for is more pay, better terms over redundancy and better working terms generally. It's part of a national strike covering the whole of the PCS union, which includes civil servants. And a few weeks ago, we saw civil servants walk out for a few days. As you say, it's particularly disruptive because it comes over half-term, and a whole massive programme of events which were scheduled, education activities for children, have had to be cancelled. At the same time today, we've got 70,000 UCU workers, now that's the University Lecturers Union, striking today, which is expected to affect 150 universities. And that strike has become particularly contentious because university leaders, vice-chancellors at a couple of the universities, are now saying that strikers' pay is going to be docked. And if they come back and do industrial action short of a strike, i.e. go to work but don't fulfil all of their planned duties, then their pay will be docked. There's a legal question over whether that's possible, but that's just an indication of just how heated this row over the strikes has become.
Now, of course, there is a rather famous name who is sort of nominally in charge of the British Museum, and that's former Chancellor George Osborne. Has he been involved in these negotiations at all? And does that add an extra sort of political angle to this particular strike?
Well, it certainly does, and the strikers round here, there is some blame, whether fairly or not, put at George Osborne's feet. He hasn't yet publicly intervened, but perhaps today the strikes were really properly kicking off now, and you can hear the shouts behind me perhaps of more pay now. So if George Osborne gets involved in this, then yes, it does certainly add a sort of political piquancy to this row. There are only 100 striking members of the British Museum out today, but of course that makes up quite a large proportion of the workforce. So we really are going to see massive disruption here.
Does it mean that the museum is closed for anyone going in, or that just simply parts of the museum won't be acting as normal?
It's bookable. If you book in advance, it is possible for people to get in, but we're not seeing all of the activities have been cancelled. The museum has basically been scaled down for the next few days, and getting in if you haven't booked in advance, the warning is going to be pretty difficult.
Well, Olivia, thank you so much for bringing us all the latest there from the British Museum, just the latest in a long litany of strikes affecting this country. No doubt inflation playing a massive, massive role there. But moving on now to a policy issue that has the potential to cause yet more headaches for Rishi Sunak. A nascent Tory rebellion is bubbling away. The government currently has plans to add a so-called hydrogen levy to our household energy bills. Yes, another green levy to artificially inflate energy prices further is currently scheduled to be slapped onto our energy bills from 2025, all to help fund the production of low-carbon hydrogen fuel. The former business secretary, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said that he tried to block these levies when he was in charge of energy policy briefly under Liz Truss. But now the new Energy ESNES department appears to be pushing ahead with the plans. And the Labour Party Lords have been drafting an amendment to the energy bill that would exempt households, although not businesses, from these levies. A political row brewing quickly. Could the Tories be about to be outflanked by Labour on lower energy bill taxes? Well, let's get more on this now from Sam Hall, the director of the Conservative Environment Network. And Sam, I'm struggling to understand how, in the midst of a cost of living crisis, particularly one that is being fuelled by energy bills, why the government would be pushing ahead with this extra charge for households.
So I think the first thing to say is that low-carbon hydrogen is going to play an important role in decarbonising parts of our economy. It's going to be used to decarbonise certain industrial processes that currently use hydrogen, aviation, shipping, potentially long-duration storage as well in the power sector. So it is going to play an important role. And at the moment, the costs of low-carbon hydrogen are higher than the costs of conventionally produced hydrogen. And so to unlock the investment in the production capacity of low-carbon hydrogen, the government is having to provide this subsidy on top. Now, as you say, the government is bringing forward a levy through the energy bill, which is how it proposes to fund this subsidy, and it's chosen to put it on consumer energy bills. And I think there are sort of three different objections that people have raised to this. Firstly, is the risk that it adds to inflation at a time when obviously inflation is already running high, predominantly being driven by energy bills. Secondly, that it's regressive, that we know that lower income households typically pay more of their income on energy compared to wealthier households. And thirdly, that it's not really fair that the people that are unlikely to directly use hydrogen in their homes are having to bear the cost of it. So I think the government should be looking at alternatives that are fairer, that put the costs on industry instead. But I would just stress that it is an important part of our net zero transition. It is a fuel that we're going to need. And there'll be lots of jobs and investment that flow from the hydrogen once it's up and running. But we've got to fund it in a fair way, I think.
I think lots of people would agree that exploring all different avenues to deliver sort of a cleaner energy is probably a wise idea, especially if this new hydrogen stuff is perhaps created with the energy that our new nuclear power stations might deliver. But some people might raise an eyebrow at why the Conservative Environment Network, a group that has been in favour of energy levies on bills in the past, is now opposing this new energy levy on bills. Have you had a change of heart?
Well, I think, looking at some of the historic levies that are currently sitting on energy bills, the measures that they have funded for energy efficiency, for renewable energy deployment, have delivered significant benefits. They've helped keep bills much lower overall than they would otherwise have been, because the renewables, the energy efficiency that they funded, have prevented us from having to burn expensive gas in the current crisis. So I think they have played a key role in keeping bills down. But going forwards, I think we do need to look at how these measures are funded. And I think new hydrogen levies, are something that we need to look at this in the round. And I think one key point to to highlight is the distortive effects of some of these levies and how they particularly are all particularly borne on electricity bills. And now electricity is the lower carbon fuel. It's got renewables, it's got nuclear, which is helping to bring down the carbon footprint of that fuel, compared to gas, which is higher carbon. So if we want to encourage households to install heat pumps, industry to switch over to electricity rather than gas, we need to make sure electricity doesn't have all these distortive levies and taxes on. So I think in terms of for the long-term benefit of the net zero transition for electrification incentives, we do need to be very careful about adding further levies to electricity. But as I say, we're definitely still in favour of the of these subsidies of getting low carbon hydrogen onto the grid. But how we fund it, I think we need to think very carefully about. And I think there are some alternatives which I hope the government explores.
Is there a risk in all of this that the government may well be going after picking winners? We don't necessarily know what our energy infrastructure will look like in 10 years' time. Will homes be heated with hydrogen, or will it be some sort of electric system? Will cars be driven by hydrogen or electricity or something else? Is it really the place of government to be pushing certain technologies over and above other ones, or might this be something that the market might be better suited to?
Well, I think we've got to have market mechanisms, and we've got to allow technologies to develop, and ultimately, before we commit to a particular pathway, we've got to test all available avenues. And I think the government is looking closely at hydrogen. It's doing trials trying to convert villages to run exclusively on hydrogen, and it's also supporting the rollout of heat pumps so that they can come down in costs and hopefully become more competitive. So I think the government is trying to back multiple horses when it comes to home heating decarbonisation. And avoid picking winners. But ultimately, there is going to have to be a decision made about what to do with the current gas network. Because to make it run on hydrogen, we would have to invest billions in changing lots of those pipes. Households would have to switch over to hydrogen. Boilers would have to have lots of other household appliances that use gas changed over for hydrogen. So I think it is going to be difficult to do this on an individual basis. There is going to have to be some sort of strategic decision made. And I think at the moment, the evidence to me is pointing overwhelmingly that heat pumps are likely to be the most cost-effective solution. To give you, the main driver for that, I think it is to do with the efficiency of the appliance. Heat pumps, you put roughly 1 unit of energy in and you get 3 out, whereas hydrogen boilers, because of the energy losses and the production of hydrogen and the burning of that hydrogen in gas boilers, are much less efficient. And I think
heat pumps, of course, are extraordinarily expensive as things stand. I just wonder, finally, in this conversation, the Conservative Environment Network has a large group of parliamentary supporters. You speak to MPs all the time. Is there appetite on the Conservative backbenchers to get behind this Labour Party amendment and scrap these extra charges on bills for households in their entirety?
Well, I think there is a lot of support within the Conservative Party for low-carbon hydrogen. Lots of the production facilities for this industry are going to be based in red wall seats in our industrial heartlands. They're going to bring jobs and investment. So I think there is definitely a desire to see some form of revenue support scheme being set up across the Conservative Party. But yes, I do think that a lot of MPs have concerns about levies. I don't know. I can't comment on what may or may not happen when the bill reaches the Commons. Is currently in the Lords, as you said. But yeah, I do think this is something that MPs will look closely at, and I hope that the government comes forward with some alternatives and for consideration, because as I say, at the moment it doesn't seem to me particularly fair or equitable, and there is this risk as well in terms of damaging the market-based incentive for electrification of heat.
Yeah, big challenges for Grant Shapps and indeed Rishi Sunak to grapple with. But for now, Sam Hall, Director of the Conservative Environment Network, thanks for joining us on The Briefing this morning. Moving on now, as most of us clock in for work this morning, it may feel like Valentine's Day is inescapable. And that may very well be because it is. New polling has shown that 2 in 5 of every Brit have had a romantic relationship in the workplace. And that rises to 1 in 3 in Generation Z. Although only 37% of respondents said that flirting is appropriate in the office, and 51% believe that employers should provide flirting guidance. And there's sad news for MPs and the civil service, as nearly a quarter of people find that the government and public sector roles are a turn-off in these sort of relationships? Well, let's speak now to Jimmy McLaughlin, who joins me live in the studio, who conducted this polling. First of all, is it surprising to see that so many people have actually had office relationships?
Well, what I was particularly interested in was looking at how different it was between the generations. So because over the last 10 years you've had the rise of dating apps, you've also had the Me Too movement, and you've had the pandemic. Now, they've all affected the office romance in their own different ways. So I was quite intrigued to see whether how much it had impacted. And actually, it was quite surprising that 1 in 3 Gen Zs, so those under 24, have already had a relationship in the workplace, which shows that the workplace is still a kind of key driver of romance and so on. It's the third place where people meet a partner after friends and family and a pub or bar setting.
Now, your poll found that 51% of employees thought that employers should provide some sort of guidance over this. How was that stratified across the different generations?
Yeah, so I was quite surprised at how high that was, but I think this is an example of kind of the Me Too movement of where, you know, people want a bit more guidance. Obviously, flirting is a very subjective term, and it comes part of company culture, which is such a kind of big driver of trying to recruit people. And so the interesting side on that was actually 18 to 24s were the least in favour of workplace guidance when it came to flirting. Still above 40%, so still high, but they were against it. Probably, I think they don't like the idea of ex-cos around the country in their 40s and 50s, their parents' age, deciding what they should and shouldn't be allowed to do when it comes to flirting.
But that's interesting, because you'd think that sort of 18 to 24-year-olds might be the most right-on Me Too kind of generation, and yet they're against this sort of corporate culture of telling people how to behave.
Yeah, exactly. I was struck by that. And also, men were actually more in favour than women of flirting and of guidance around this as well. So that also sort of slightly struck me. But across the board, it was high, and companies are putting more and more time into trying to get these things right.
Now, interestingly, 37% said that flirting is appropriate in the workplace, meaning that a considerable majority thought that it isn't. What should we read into that?
Well, I think that's part of the sort of, you know, Me Too sort of rise over the last few years, and I think it's a very subjective term, isn't it, flirting? You know, what is flirting to one person compared to another? So I think that was is quite a big sort of point on that. But at the end of the day, when you've had 40% of people that have had some sort of office romance, and interestingly, 20% of those people have never told anyone, which might be quite interesting. But I think, you know, it is something that companies actually do need to sort of take seriously and work out, you know, what their policies are.
The other point about this is different roles might seem more attractive and others might seem less attractive. Interestingly, it was health and law that were sort of at the top of the table. But right down there at the bottom, very few people, just 22% of people found that government roles, that civil service roles, were a turn off. Do people just not fancy MPs?
Well, I think that's, you know, coming from my world, it was quite startling to see that was one of the most undesirable sectors alongside retail and hospitality in terms of maintaining a relationship. And I think it is because, you know, MPs work, you know, incredible hours, as do the civil service, as do those in retail and hospitality as well. You know, these are hard jobs that are demanding and will be requiring people to work this evening, for example, so maybe not able to make time for Valentine's Day. But it was interesting to see healthcare at the top of the most desired. I wonder if that's part of pandemic, you know, and sort of, you know, we praise the NHS workers, etc. But actually a real sort of tangible thing that's come out is an increase in respect for those kind of key workers.
It's almost like there's sort of a social value, a cachet to being in a relationship with someone who does something socially useful. Yes. Although right next to that is lawyers, which and lawyers don't always necessarily have the highest of reputations, but I suppose that's just a financial point.
Yes, I suppose, and finance was quite high up there as well, so that's true. But interestingly, health and fitness, so slightly different from healthcare, but was also ranked higher. That's obviously probably got some other attractions to it. But I think it's really, it is interesting. You know, we define so much of who we are from our job and the kind of status that brings. And that's one of the key things that we we were doing with the polling is that we all go to job for financial reward, but actually there's a lot of ancillary benefits that we get from that as well. Camaraderie with colleagues, flirting with colleagues in this instance, but also that sort of status and purpose. And I think that's really important. And that's what we try to get across in Jimmy's Jobs of the Future podcast.
Now, interestingly, Jimmy's Jobs of the Future does look forward as well as what's going on at the moment. And one of these questions really struck me. It was about the proportion of people who would date a robot. 1 in 8 would be comfortable dating a robot. Did that surprise you?
It did. It was that high, yes. But I think it's interesting with the rise of ChatGPT and Alexa and so on that these are coming into people's lives a lot more, and people aren't sort of for people that are lonely and so on, I think they have become quite interesting kind of companions, particularly in the elderly and so on. I mean, I was surprised that you put romantic in front of it and it's still that high. But I think it is this interesting thing. We are seeing this huge technological revolution take place, and the rise of robots is going to become very real. And again, we are going to have relationships with them in different ways. And where does romance start and all that? And would you flirt with your robot, etc., to kind of bring a couple of the points together? I think it'll be sort of fascinating to kind of see where we go.
Really fascinating and slightly concerning, I suppose, given that there is a bit of an epidemic of loneliness. There is this sort of movement of incels, involuntarily celibate people, and some of these people have been committing terrorist crimes and all the rest of it. Might the way that robots sort of plug into that be something that could help solve this, or might that be a turn towards some sort of dystopia?
I mean, it could be either, couldn't it? I mean, we are right at the foothills of this kind of AI revolution, and viewers that have played with ChatGPT or yourself just can see that it's going to be a huge thing of our economy in the next 10 years. And I do think there needs to be a national conversation about, regulation. Should it be regulated? Do we need global regulation in it? And so on, because this is on par with kind of the internet, and we didn't get everything right necessarily those in the early days. So it will be fascinating to kind of see how policymakers tackle it.
No, really, really interesting. Well, Jimmy McLaughlin, former Number 10 advisor and host of the Jimmy's Jobs of the Future podcast. Thanks for joining me live in the studio. That's it. That's everything we've got time for today. Thanks for sticking around with us. We'll be up at 9:30 tomorrow morning again. Coming up, it's Bev Turner today, but first, here's the weather. Was there music in the air? I can't.
We can see here to Harwood.
Why have we got no audio?
Tell everyone to be quiet out there. Nobody can talk. It's my